We have to have people willing to find it. Excited, I think he does a great job.
Oh, I think so
I
too.
don't know.
I do too. I don't care what they say, I still like it.
Well,
Countdown, 1 minute. And I have to report to the library on how many people attended. 3, 6, 7, plus me, that's 8. Actually, I'm big enough for counters 2, so
But it's too cold outside. People don't want to come out when it's this cold.
I know.
We're not brave like we used to be.
Well,
It's not that.
I did email an invitation to Al Gore,
I was.
and
he couldn't make it.
he sent his regrets that he did not want to impose his carbon footprint of his jet here, and he was busy making the latest improvements to his invention, the internet. So otherwise, I'm sure he would have joined us.
Have you noticed every time we have a cold snap, he tends to be somewhere nearby, giving a speech or something.
All right, we're going to start. You guys probably know a lot of the introductory stuff, but I'll just tell you some of the stuff. My name is Norman Silber. It's S-I-L-B like boy E-R. It's Silber. It's not silver, although it means the same thing in German. It is not Sibler. It's not sliver. It's not whatever. People call me Norman. People call me Norm. And people call me other things that are not printable in a family publication or on a family channel. So the reason I wore this is from the legislature. I spent two wonderful years in the New Hampshire House of Representatives, representing one of 4 representatives from Belknap County District 2, which is the towns of Guilford and Meredith. Mark Hebert, who's over there, is one of the other 2. He and I decided that 2 was enough for a while and to take a break, so we've taken a break. The reason I wore this is the original crest, the original seal of the state of New Hampshire. And somewhere along the line, years later, that the seal got changed. So there's actually 2 state seals. This is the original one. And if you see a state legislator wearing one of these, it generally, not always, but it generally means that they're one of the conservative stripes. There's a state rep who makes these up for people at some nominal charge. So I just wanted to show you that there is a difference here. Now, one of the things, let me tell you a little bit about myself before we get right into the presentation. I was born and raised in Tampa, Florida. When I was 17, I went through the public schools in Tampa. I went away to college in New Orleans at Tulane University. I got an undergraduate degree in history, a BA in history with a major in, a BA in English with a minor in chemistry, and I went to law school and graduated from Tulane Law School. I had scholarships and loans throughout the 7 glorious years in New Orleans. When I got to New Orleans, I was 17. It was those days, the drinking age in Louisiana was 18, but I was big. And so one of the first persons that I met when I got to New Orleans, and I was a lot thinner then too, was Jack Daniels. And so I got a lot of the Jack Daniels out of my system during those 7 glorious years. So I don't drink anymore, Jack Daniels or otherwise. My liver thanks me for it. So I had scholarship loans, and I worked all through school, undergraduate school. In law school, I worked all 3 years and 1 summer as a private detective, carrying a gun. And the last summer, between my 2nd and 3rd year of law school, I worked in a Wall Street trust company that specialized in investment management, which is where I went when I graduated, spent 3 years there, went to night school at the NYU Graduate School of Business, studying in the MBA program, got interrupted, didn't finish because I got lured back to Florida, which I never thought I would do, moved to Miami, which I never thought I would ever do, because that's on the other coast, very strange place, and I spent the next 40 years in Miami. Next year, 2020, I will be a 50-year member of the Florida Bar. Florida doesn't give any reciprocity to any states, so you cannot get admitted here or in other states on what's called a reciprocity. You basically have to take the bar exam everywhere else. So I've been coming to the Lakes region for 40 years, Actually, the first time in New Hampshire, I went to North Conway. A friend of mine and I in law school, we decided on an Easter break to go on a lobster eating tour of New England. And we ended up somehow in Conway on the way to Portland. And so that's my first introduction to New Hampshire. And then I saw the case in the New Hampshire's license plate, the motto, live free or die, with the Quaker. You guys are all too young to remember that, where the Quaker put a black tape over live free or die because it was offensive to his religious beliefs, and he got a ticket for it. And it was appealed to the US Supreme Court under First Amendment grounds, and the Supreme Court said, yes, you can do that. Okay? But I like the idea of that motto, and I didn't know the whole motto until I got up here, but in any event. So, been coming up here for 40 years, the Lakes region, bought a vacation condo in '05, took the bar exam here in '07, licensed in both places, which means I have to do continuing ed in both places, but I don't really practice. I'm semi-retired. I was explaining to one of your number that I do a very limited amount of work just for New Hampshire lawyers, helping them with clients who have Florida issues. And I have one corporate client in Florida that I do some work for. So, in any event, I've always been a constitutional scholar. In law school, you take 2 courses that are relevant to what we're doing. And so tonight, in about 90 minutes or so, we're going to cover 2 semester courses of law school, believe it or not. One is on federal jurisdiction and procedure, and the other is on constitutional law. Now, let me just tell you this about law school. Most modern thinking now, law school's 3 years, most modern thinking is that the 3rd year is a waste. But law schools are big profit generators for universities that have them. Because you don't have to have a laboratory like in a medical school, you don't have to have cadavers, you just have to have some rooms, you get some adjunct professors to come in there and lecture, and you charge them $30,000, $40,000 a year. Hey, what's not to like, right? So, one of the things I learned in New Orleans is never look in a restaurant kitchen or where sausage is made. Well, the law schools today in the United States are where sausage is made, because they are cranking out law graduates like sausage. And unless you go to a top-tier law school and are in the top of your class, the best way that you're going to get called for a job is one of 2 ways. You're going to call either waiter or taxi. A lot of lawyers, a lot of people with law degrees have trouble getting jobs in law, and so they end up doing other things. Some people go to law school for the law background, not to use it to practice law. My son, who is in his 30s, went to law school after getting a history degree. He was a natural in computers. It would have been too much to listen to us, myself and my wife, to go and major in computer science, so he majored in history and then went to law school. And when he found out he couldn't get a job with a history major, and after working in some law fields for the summer, he decided he hated it. So now what does he do? He's a web developer on his own, works for himself. So that's fine. But he has the law background. And I help him review contracts and stuff like that. So basically, everybody should have one of the handouts, all the handouts back there. You got the pamphlets. And what I'm going to talk about is, first of all, this acronym, SCOTUS. I don't know when it started. It's relatively recent. SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the U.S., the United States. I think it started when the Secret Service started referring to the president as POTUS, President of the U.S. So now we got POTUS and SCOTUS. Some people tell me that this has some sexual meanings, but I ignore all that. So, in any event, SCOTUS is what we're going to use. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to tell you the difference for talking about the federal judicial system and the differences between the federal and state judicial system. Okay, first question, first of all, I ask you, if you have a cell, put it on vibrate. And secondly, if you have questions, make a note and hold it till the end, please. Okay, the Constitution, the booklet has the Declaration of Independence in the front, and the Constitution afterwards, and then it has some bibliography. This comes from Hillsdale College, which is one of the few schools in the country that does not accept any federal funding, and they require all their students to study the Constitution, the Federalist Papers, the Declaration of Independence. If you look at the Declaration of Independence and you look at the list of grievances against King George, and then you look at some of the provisions in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, you will see that they are fairly directly correlated. That the founders tried to deal with these problems in the Constitution. Now, of course, everything started July 4th, 1776. New Hampshire was a colony, one of the 13 original colonies, and when we declared independence July 4th, 1776, after we won the War of Independence, there was a convention in Philadelphia, which I guess was our capital at the time, and the founders adopted what was called the Articles of Confederation. And it created a very weak form of a national government, and it had a lot of problems, and it wasn't working. So they met again, and through a series of a lot of meetings, a lot of drafting, they drafted the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Now, the Constitution was not adopted until it was promulgated in 1787. It needed 9 of the 13 colonies to adopt it. Number 1 was Connecticut, and number 9 was, as we say in Miami, New Hampshire. Okay. So it became effective 2 years later, well, almost 2 years, March 1, 1789. So what I suggest to you is these documents are very important. There was a lot of arguments within the colonies about the adoption of this strong central government with limitations on powers, and there was a concern that the federal government would be too strong and it would not preserve enough rights to the individual colonies, which then became states. What I suggest to you is this little pamphlet represents documents, of course, in the debates leading up to the ratification of the Constitution. That was when the Federalist Papers were written. And the Federalist Papers were written by Hamilton and Madison and Jay and some others, and they basically argued for the adoption of this. There's also an interesting book by Charles Murray Beard, it's probably out of print by now. It's called An Economic Interpretation of the Constitution, talked about the different economic interests that we're fighting. In any event, we have this. What I suggest to you is, this is a very important little pamphlet. The document is very important, the words are very important. Our countrymen have died for this. And they continue to die. They continue to serve today overseas and in this country to preserve our way of life, which is represented by the Constitution of the United States.
Crop TV.